Now, three Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show. Let's take a watch.
Oh, for God's sake!
No, stop it!
The woman climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the display. One bystander turned a hose pipe on the protesters before the Met Police arrived on the scene and arrested the protesters. Well, with me now is Kush, a Just Stop Oil supporter. And Kush, thank you for joining us today. I suppose many people will be a little bit confused at why there was such a vicious attack on plants this afternoon.
Sure. So first of all, let me say that the action that took place today at the Royal Flower Show was not a vicious attack on plants. They threw around some children's paint powder, which is completely non-toxic and can be washed away without causing any harm. But what is a vicious attack on plants is the climate crisis, because we know that our dependence on fossil fuels is driving us towards climate collapse. And we know that actually our food security is at a threat as a result of it. If you just look at the growing seasons of maize, corn, one of the world's staple crops, it's now 9 days shorter than it used to be because of the climate crisis. You look at wheat, it's 6 days shorter. If you look at rice, it's 2 days shorter. So we have got crop failures happening across the world and people being pushed into extreme hunger. Right now, in Somalia, there is unprecedented famine that is taking place, and there is a child being admitted to hospital every single minute with malnutrition. I work as a doctor in the NHS, and I have committed my life towards trying to protect people's health. And so I think that the action that was taken today by supporters of Just Stop Oil is absolutely necessary. You may say, well, why on earth did they go to the Chelsea Flower Show? And I'd say, well, because actions like that are impactful. It's what's got me talking to you today about the famines that are happening in Somalia, because otherwise I don't think that we would be talking about that. And you might say, well, what do you want the people at the Chelsea Flower Show to do about it? And I'd say, well, we want them to join us in civil resistance against the government. Because it is our government, along with governments around the world, who are continuing to license new fossil fuels, even though we know that that is causing a climate breakdown.
Kush, the government agrees with you. The government has committed the country to net zero by 2050. We're seeing the most extraordinary amount of decarbonisation. We've halved our emissions since 1990. We're seeing the internal combustion engine being banned in this country. It's extraordinary. The government's on your side here. Who are you arguing with?
Well, unfortunately, the government's plans are too little too late. They are saying that they want to get net zero by 2050, and yet they are still licensing over 100 new oil and gas fields. That is not compatible with us meeting our Paris Climate Agreement. The International Energy Agency, the IPCC, all of the world's leading scientists say that new oil and gas needs to have stopped already. And yet we are still allowing new oil and gas to be extracted from the North Sea. That is who we are against. We are against the government. We are against the government.
The agreements that were reached at COP26 in Glasgow, where I reported for 2 weeks, very much kept warming to 1.5 degrees alive as a goal. It's quite possible to have some oil extraction, but also do lots of other things, as 90% of the global economy has now committed to do. I find it very strange that you seem to be living in this parallel universe where somehow you're having debates that seem to be had in the 1990s, rather than living in the reality today where 90% of the global economy agrees with you.
I'm not sure that you quite fully understand the scale of damage that new oil and gas is continuing to do. So at the moment, we are approaching what are called tipping points. So all good and well that we'll be net zero by 2050, but the problem is what happens between now and 2050 will actually guide the future of humanity for millennia to come. And that is what happens in terms of tipping points in the Arctic Circle. So once we end up losing parts of Arctic ice sheets, those will become irrecoverable. Once we deforest the Amazon rainforest to a certain degree, then it just becomes impossible to recover from that.
Which seems extraordinary then, why there are environmental protesters who are opposing carbon capture and storage. There are environmental protesters who are campaigning against wind farms and the infrastructure needed to support them. There are Green Party councillors across this country who are opposing solar farms. Why are you siding with these people if you're so concerned about the environment?
I'm not siding with anyone who's against solar farms or wind farms. I would love to see carbon capture and storage, but I think we need to realize that carbon capture and storage is not something that is a realistic prospect to tackle the climate crisis. It, at the moment, is being used as a delaying tactic by the oil and gas industry to justify them continuing to rely on oil and gas.
Oh, come on, you're now arguing against it. You're using talking points against carbon capture and storage. That's entirely contradictory to your
something that could work on the scale that it needs to actually get us to net zero, then great. But actually, what is carbon capture and storage doing at the moment in terms of the scale of it? It's hardly flickering any impact on the amount of CO2 that's being released. And the energy that is generated from carbon capture and storage is actually then being used to extract more fossil fuels. So I'm saying, let's be real about what carbon capture and storage is and what its prospects are.
I noticed you talked about crop failure a little bit earlier. I wonder, as someone with a medical background, what's your view of the campaigning work that Greenpeace has done against golden rice, the GM crops that have allowed people to get the nutrients they need in the developing world? Greenpeace, for 30 years, campaigned against this life-saving development in crop technology. Are you siding with them too?
I'm here speaking on behalf of Just Stop Oil, and our campaign is very clear. Our campaign is targeted at the government, asking them to stop new oil and gas. I don't know the details of all of Greenpeace's actions. On the whole, Greenpeace are calling for the similar sort of thing, which is no new oil and gas, and I can support that. I don't know every single campaign that every other environmental movement has done, and I can't speak on behalf of them.
Well, Kush, thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. I really do hope that your sort of environmentalism spreads further amongst particularly the Green councillors and indeed Greenpeace and other green groups that seem to be relatively contradictory in some of their aims. But talking about green issues, perhaps talking about green taxes that make our energy bills more expensive.